Sorry, you what? You didn't think I should know this, or you didn't have my number? What's going on here? Okay, so I talked about the operation. Well, I don't think I've actually told you guys what the operation is. The operation is, well, I think I've told you a little, but I'll tell you the full thing now. The operation is, well, it's actually multiple operations. Basically, they're trying to retake Tobruk. The Allies are trying to retake Tobruk. This has gone, this operation started by Hazelden. The actual quote from Hazelden is, "The thing's grown out of all sense and proportions." Hazelden, of course, we talked about him earlier. This was supposed to be the SIG taking the SOE Commandos and the SAS and the led by the LRDG into Tobruk to blow up fuel stations and to free the 30,000 POWs and to basically free the POWs who would then try and escape, or they just cause havoc and get recaptured or picked up by ships. That was the original plan, was to get as many POWs out as possible and blow up the fuel dump. It has now turned into the SOE Commandos, the Special Operation Executive Commandos, would be inserted by men of the SIG into Tobruk, where they would bomb the fuel dumps, free the prisoners, knock out the naval guns, or as many as possible, or capture the naval guns. They end up knocking most of them out instead of capturing the naval gun is just ridiculous. What are they going to do with it when they just blow them up? That's one part of the mission. The second part of the mission is then a giant landing operation by Royal Marines, Royal Fusiliers, Royal Scots Guards, insane amount of units on destroyers and naval ships coming in, covered by the RAF and the US Army Air Force, because the US Air Force wouldn't exist until 48. I don't know, that wasn't... Anyway. The US Air Force is like playing a little bit of a role, and that's the big thing is this attack from the sea. They were going to arm all the prisoners who were then going to fight with them. This was the plan. This is actually the plan. Yeah, it's gone ridiculously out of... It was supposed to be a raid that's now turned into a full-blown assault. That's not what special forces are good for. And they speak about this, the guys involved. If you're trying to infiltrate a town, you don't want bombs raining down everywhere, because then, number one, you could kill your own guys. But more importantly, number two, that pass you've got that says, I'm allowed to do this, suddenly the town goes on complete lockdown and everything gets vetted. Everyone gets incredibly edgy and on edge, nervous. And you basically blow the whole operation by raining hellfire from the sky in the form of bombs. So the commandos weren't particularly thrilled about this sort of air portion of the invasion. Yeah. So basically the entire purpose of the plan has been flipped from a lightning raid to, like, the whole point of the LRDG, the SAS, the SOE Commandos, the SIG, the entire point of them is to destroy enemy installations and facilities. Their whole purpose is to facilitate larger actions, to go raiding and draw the enemy attention away. Before El Alamein, before El Alamein, I believe it was, or maybe somewhere, I think, I'm going to say it's El Alamein, I could be wrong. There was a giant SAS LRDG mission, like a huge mission, somewhere in the desert. And it was a setup. The Allies used the SAS and the LRDG without telling them, but they weren't particularly upset. They used them to draw huge German and Italian reserves away from the line, out into the desert. That was the purpose of these guys. Their purpose was to blow up airfields, to, in the case of the SIG, to insert people into areas, to gather intelligence, for the SOE Commandos, maybe to do assassination attempts, like Operation Flipper, where they tried to kill Rommel. Things like that. Their job is not to be shock troops doing the work of, like, that's something you'd send like a US Marine or a Royal Marine or a paratrooper to do, to take and hold the beachhead while you bring in landing troops, and if the beachhead isn't held, the landing troops get blown out of the water. They're only in destroyers. So that's the operation they're going on. Okay, so that's Operation Agreement. There are 4 operations. There's Agreement, Bigamy, Nicety, and Caravan. So Agreement is the attack on Tobruk and the seizure of Tobruk, and Agreement is the main operation. The other three are diversions. Bigamy is led by Major David Sterling, the head of the SAS, the Phantom Major, as the Germans called him. And Bigamy was to be an assault on Benghazi. Benghazi, of course, the capital of Libya. It was in the news a few years ago, you might have heard of it. There's a good movie, I can't I'll put the name on the screen now. It's actually quite a good movie about that modern Benghazi, that attack on the US Embassy on 9/11. Anyway, the attack on Benghazi, led by David Sterling, he had some SIG men with him. The SIG were actually spread out among the units to the point where there were actually not enough SIG with the main infiltration force, which is the place where you think there would be the most SIG, but we'll get to that later. So David Sterling and the SAS are going to attack Benghazi, supported by the US Army Air Force and the RAF, who are going to bomb the crap out of Benghazi. They're going to dump fake paratroopers out of the craft. They've got, Fellas, the US guy in Cairo who had basically been telling the Germans everything. Oh, I forgot to mention, he was actually the Germans' single source of intelligence in the desert, their best form of intelligence. That's the point that Rommel basically... Fellas to Rommel was ultra to Montgomery, or ultra to Eisenhower. That's how important he was. And I won't go into it, but the Germans basically tried to do their own form of road watch by getting German spies from the Abwehr into the Allied lines to verify what Fellas was saying was true. But the problem was the German spies sent messages back via Ultra, which the British just decrypted, and then, oh look, there they are. Grabbed the German spies, turned them in Camp M20 or 020 or something of the equivalent, and basically told Fellas, the Germans are reading all your communications, you're no longer going to be given any real information, so you will now be sending fake information. And they basically turned Fellas, who was very embarrassed by this, they basically took his job away from him and made him an intelligence thing, who was basically just sending fake information, and the two German spies were basically confirming that fake information. Anyway, so that Bigamy, David Sterling came up with the name. I think it's quite good for a commando operation like this. Bigamy is a diversionary attack on Benghazi. Then we have Operation Nicety. That's a Sudanese operation. It's not really that relevant to what we're talking about here. It's not Special Forces level stuff. Well, it is, but it's not the Special Forces that we're talking about, so I won't go into it. And finally, we have Operation Caravan. Operation Caravan is mostly New Zealanders, and their job is to hit Bacha Airfield, that's where the SIG had failed in their attempt with the French SAS, where Bruckner had betrayed them. So they were going to go back. There were 18 bombers at Bacha Airfield, and they wanted them gone. So Bacha Airfield with Operation Caravan will be led by Major Easonsmith, who is a New Zealander who had started the war as a private. Now he's a major. That's quite the jump, but he was very good at what he did. He had 45 men in 17 trucks. He had 47 men in 18 trucks, but a Scots Guard officer. There's a ton of Scots Guards officers in the Special Forces. Every book you read on the Special Forces is like, Scots Guard officer this guy, Scots Guard officer this guy. David Sterling himself was a Scots Guard officer. Scots Guard officer, Scots Guards officer. It seems that the same people who get attracted to the Scots Guards also get attracted to this sort of Cavalier desert stuff, which probably says a lot for the Scots Guards. And Easonsmith's unit had a few Maoris in it. The guy who was their big explosives expert was a Maori. Their explosives were basically very primitive early thermite. So thermite, for those who don't know, those of you who aren't up on your 9/11 conspiracy stuff, thermite is... I shouldn't really say what thermite is, because thermite's actually quite easy to make. Thermite eats through metal. If you've seen Breaking Bad, they use it to break into that the methylamine storage facility where the very white light. It's quite easy to make, so I won't go into how to do thermite. And these thermite things are actually made in beer cans, which are then put in little sacks with fuses in them. And if you make more than 6 of them, you basically get cancer and die. Obviously not immediately, but you get extremely bad headaches, and if you keep making more than, say, 6 of them was the number they found, that if you made 6, you were out of action for like the rest of the day. So they had 3, you made 3 and then pass it to someone else. So they really had to spend a long time making these very toxic, poisonous things. And they ended up with giant, it was so many in their cars, they reckon that At one point, Easton Smith is quite worried that a single bullet could set off one of these cars, and if it ignited even just a single one of these sort of thermite bombs, the whole thing would just go up in flames in an explosion that could probably take out the whole column. So these were very dangerous, and of course Easton Smith had the most thermite in his car because he's the officer. He has to take the biggest risk. What else happened? Does anything else? Oh yeah, one of the RAF officers, who is basically the guy who's going to be coordinating the RAF operation, falls asleep and falls out of the thing. He falls out of the truck, and luckily for him, he only dislocates both of his shoulders, and it's at night, so he falls out, and they manage to pick him up. Oh, the reason they're driving at night, I should mention this. To get from Kufra, where they are, to 100 kilometers outside of Tobruk, where the staging area is, they need to go past Jala. Now, Jala is basically an Italian fortress, and Jala is really hard to sneak past for 3 reasons. Number 1, there is an aircraft that flies day and night, morning and afternoon, out of Jala, around, patrols the area, and then comes back. 2, there is an Italian presence in Jala. Jala is not just like an outpost with 5 guys in it. There's actually an Italian unit stationed there. 3, 500 miles around Jala is literally dead flat. As in, nothing, like no sand dune, it is just flat. They say in the book that there is not even sand blowing around. Even how hard the wind is, how brutal the wind is, there isn't even sand blowing. It's just dead, flat ground. There is nowhere to hide. There are some shrubs. There are some, like, scattering of trees, like a couple of bushes over there. The bushes are quite big, but nothing you could hide 17 cars in. So the British have to get by Jala. And, the guys in Operation Caravan have to get by Jala. And what they do is they decide to go in at night. And they go in at night with all the lights off. Now, this is bad. Well, it's good. It's the only way they can do it. Like, this is literally the only way they can sneak past. But it's not the ideal position. You're trying to keep 17 trucks in coordination with one another with no lights. Which means, what if one of them gets lost? Well, that's bad. So you got to keep you guys together. You could, even if they had convoy lights, you couldn't have used them, because any light, 500, people can see that with binoculars. They can see this one spot in the desert just moving along. Oh, I wonder if that's a truck. So they had to be very careful, and they went through at night, and they rumbled along until they stopped. Easton Smith called a halt, and everyone was tense. People wouldn't even cough. It's extremely cold, and the commandos didn't bring any warm clothing because no one had told them to. So they're shivering in little shorts and t-shirts, pretty much, like the cut-off sleeve type things. They're shivering there, and they're freezing cold, and the word goes down the line, tanks. The tanks ahead. And everyone panics. But they panic in the way that Special Forces guys panic, which is basically they start reaching for weapons. Like, they don't freak out. But their adrenaline just goes through the roof. Tanks in this area. The best thing they've got are the Breda anti-aircraft guns, which are these Italian things that I've talked about them before. That's their anti-tank. The thermite they have can melt through an aeroplane. If you put it on top of the engine and boil it down, it'll melt straight through an engine block. But it's not really something you can throw on a vehicle. Like, it really has to be placed. Thermite is not something you can just sort of like chuck through a window and blow up like a grenade. You have to actually strategically put it over something. They can't really deal with tanks, especially if the tanks are guarded by infantry, because Chevys and Jeeps actually make quite a lot of noise at night in the desert. If there's 10 of them, I think it's 17 of them, so it's quite a lot of noise. And the noise will travel, and if they start blowing things up, Italians are going to come out of Jala. They're going to be in trouble. So Easton Smith creeps forward, and he creeps forward with a few men, and he comes to these tanks. And he comes up to the tanks, and you find they're awfully quiet. Very, very quiet. Like, you think that if there were guys, even if there was like 2 armoured cars, or a couple of Italian tanks, or a couple of German tanks, there would be chatter, or something. Like, there would be a fire going. Nothing. And he goes up to the tanks, and he runs forward. Him and a few guys run forward with Tommy guns, and they assault some thorn bushes, because that's all it was. It was just thorn bushes in the night. The way the moon was hitting them, they looked exactly like a row of tanks parked up. There was sort of like a bit of a shimmering thing there that was messing with everybody. And these Allied soldiers, who are now ridiculously on edge, drive past. They drive past Jala, and make it out. But now they have the problem of the aircraft, and they drive all night, and they're basically thinking we just have to outrun the aircraft. If it spots us, we're dead, because they'll just radio in that we're here and send men after us and send aircraft after us, to which we will just be, we have no response, so we'll be killed. So they run. They drive. But they drive away from Jala. And miraculously, there is no patrol that day. The Italians just don't launch a patrol that day. And the men manage to escape from Jala completely undetected. There they reached Tobruk near Bacha, ready to attack Bacha itself. With them is a quite very interesting character, a Russian named Popsky. And Popsky is running a unit called Popsky's Private Army, full of local Arabs. And because of Popsky and his army, it's like a platoon, if that, the guys in Ethan Smith's unit have a second mission. And that's partly the reason why they have so much thermite with them. They are going to go into Bacha and pull a Kelly's Heroes. They are going to rob the Bacha bank. They're going to go into Bacha, blow the vault, and take the money and gold, and take some of it, and use the rest to pay these Popsky's private army. Popsky is a Russian who fought for the French in the First World War, and then when the Second World War rolled around, he just sort of like went up to the British and offered them his services, because he'd been living in Egypt for a while. He'd made some local contacts, and they went, okay, you madman, go out and do whatever you want. And he raised this army again, it's a platoon, if that. And these Arabs basically just cause havoc. These are the guys that Rommel thought was like the entire British Special Forces. Yeah, it's only like a little part of it. But he paid them with the loot. He paid them with captured German rifles. He paid them with sugar and tobacco and all that sort of, like, all the nice stuff you can capture if you hit a little outpost somewhere. And the Bacha Bank would be a giant haul for these guys. So they were really, really looking forward to this. So these guys are in pretty high spirits. Ethan Smith's quite happy. There's all of Ethan Smith's vehicles, or at least most of them, are covered in Maori artwork and Maori insignia and all this sort of stuff. There's not a lot of Maoris in his unit, but most of the unit is from New Zealand. The LRDG was actually mostly founded by New Zealanders. The idea itself wasn't a New Zealand idea, but the initial unit was mostly made up of New Zealanders. Although, basically, there was like the trial run, and then after that trial run, they went, okay, open it up to everyone. Australians, not a lot of Australians, but mostly like South Africans, Scotsmen, again, Scots Guards officers, Scotsmen, Irish, English, like they all just poured in after that. But it was initially a Kiwi thing. So as Ethan Smith, the guys with Ethan Smith, the commandos, some of the commanders with Ethan Smith, their commander, Captain Campbell, had actually got really, really bad dysentery. So there was a bit iffy about what was going to happen to him. Dysentery is not like diarrhea. It's not like Indian food stuff. It's not even like food poisoning. Dysentery can kill you. It's very serious. And Campbell has been battling dysentery for like the entire time he's been out in the desert. He really should never have come, but yeah, there was actually a chance for him to be medevaced. Two other guys were medevaced, the guys who crashed. I remember I mentioned earlier there were 47 guys in 18 trucks. That's because one of them smashed it and knocked all his teeth out, and the other one paralyzed himself. And they actually got medevaced out by an aircraft in the middle of the desert. But yeah, Campbell refuses to go, and he's now got dysentery, leading the SOE Commandos attached to the Bacha raid. So that'll come up later. Just keep it in. So the SIG and the other commandos are stationed ready to go into Tobruk. And they're going to invade Tobruk with 80 men. Well, technically they're going to invade Tobruk with 86 men. And that's a problem, because the German, official German doctrine was 40 men per car. Per truck, sorry, 40 men per car. 40 men per truck. 40 POWs. But the British, you could squeeze 40 POWs into a truck, but you couldn't squeeze 40 POWs, 30 Sten guns, a couple of brands, some MP40s, some MG34s, some rifles, some grenades, a bunch of explosives in a truck, sorry. So the British had 3 trucks painted up with German camouflage, and they actually even painted German captured symbols on the top of them, like the booty symbol. So that they just, they really went to town on these things. License plates, everything was German. I remember the SIG perfectionists, everything was German. And they actually had to train the commandos how to act like POWs. because the commandos were they were very excited and they were very happy, but the SIG basically had to come in and like, no, you're supposed to be sad. You've been captured. Remember, you're out of this war. You haven't had any good food. You haven't written letters to your home, to your wife, your girlfriend, your mother, your father, your brothers. You have no idea what's going on. You're supposed to be beaten down. And Captain Buck actually breaks down in laughing at one point, because the commandos just go from, they do drills of going from this like beaten down state to getting weapons up and fighting, and they do like mock things of overthrowing a guard patrol, like say if a German section like attacks them, what do? And Buck, observing these things, is just thrilled with how great they're performing, and he finds the transition between beaten down commandos to the cream of the British Army just taking out these Germans and doing all this stuff. He thinks it's hilarious. So I guess if you ever need a whole bunch of extras for stage play you're putting on, I would highly recommend the British Special Forces from the Second World War, because they seem to be able to pick up a few tricks pretty much on the spot. Like the SIG managed to perfect their stuff in a few months, and these commandos managed to play act in a few days. However, remember how I said there were 86 men? That's because 6 of them were members of the SIG, Captain Buck and a few guys. One of whom was, one of the SIG guys was basically, he was in the SIG because he kept getting in trouble. He kept getting charged with being AWOL. Because he was a rear echelon guy who had been put rear echelon, but he really wanted to fight in the front. And he kept escaping from his rear echelon post and running to a frontline battalion and fighting with them. And he would get found out, sent back, punished, do it again, punished, do it again, punished, do it again, punished, to the point where he basically, as soon as the Special Forces got signed up, his commanding officer just got rid of him. I'm not sure why he didn't just get rid of him earlier. But anyway, one of those guys is with him. There's a few other guys. Tiffin is with David Sterling. But there's only 6 of them. And the Germans, Germans pay quite a lot of attention to detail. I'm not sure if you know this. I assume you do, because the Germans are famous for this, especially in the Second World War. And the Germans have 3 men per car. Per truck. I keep saying car, 3 men per truck. So they're already breaking the rule about 40 men per truck, and they've got 80 men in 3 trucks. Now they are only going to have 2 men per truck, which would be a driver, a navigator, and a guy standing up with an MP40 through the roof, looking back at the prisoners. They think they can get away with the 30 men per truck because they'll just put a bunch of blankets over and say it's really cold. A lot of the guys had actually got head colds because it was freezing cold at night, as it is in the desert. And they figured, no, we can't get away with not having men. So they said, we need 3 people who would like to join the SIG as non-speaking volunteers. The actual quote is, don't worry chaps, it's a non-speaking role, from Buck, which is fantastic. And the entire commando unit puts their hands up smiling. It's fun. They don't have to sit in the back of the friggin' truck. They can wear a great coat. They can stand up. They wouldn't be given a full uniform because technically you would absolutely still be captured and executed. Like if a German caught you in a German greatcoat with a German hat on, carrying an MP40, you're trying to pass yourself off as a German. That's pretty obvious. But if you can just, if you get into a trouble, just take the greatcoat off, throw the hat on the ground, British uniform, you're fine. As opposed to the SIG, who were wearing, as I said before, German down to the underpants. So these volunteers, 3 lieutenants, Lieutenant Lawton. One of the guys who volunteers is actually an SBS lieutenant. Remember, the SBS are involved. The SBS are involved because of the naval part of the operation. The SBS are basically there to coordinate the naval part, as well as being commandos, but they're there to sort of specialise. Their main role is going to come when the ships come on the ground. They're going to be calling them in with the signal guns, and they're going to be telling them where to go and how to act and everything like that. One of the SBS lieutenants, who all 3 men picked are lieutenants. All men picked are lieutenants, and one of them is an SBS lieutenant who had been one of the guys involved in Flipper. And the reason he was here was because of Operation Flipper, the attempted assassination of Rommel. And he had actually one of the more famous things that he'd done was hold on to the back of a motor torpedo boat, like hanging off the back rail, with a satchel around his neck full of sticky bombs. One of Cecil Clarke's. I should do a video on Cecil Clarke and those guys at the Ministry of Unconventional Warfare. But basically, a sticky bomb is not like the thing you see in Saving Private Ryan. That did exist, but the sticky bomb is something else. It's like a glass cylinder. It looks like a toffee apple. I'll put a picture up. Churchill loved them for the. They were great for the Home Guard in Britain. If you gave like a whole bunch of people these sticky bombs, you could blow up German tanks all over the place. They were not good for actual soldiers. They were made of glass. They had a metal case around them. But if you knock a thing of glass, it'll blow up and you're in trouble. So you don't really want to be carrying these things with you. And here he is slinging off the back of a motor torpedo boat, hurling them at German shipping. He actually gets one stuck to him at one point. It's stuck to his arm. And he's frantically trying to get this thing off him. They're covered in like a tar type substance, so he rips part of his uniform away. And he describes it as exhilarating and terrifying to basically be hanging off the back of a thing, hurling the equivalent of giant, well, they were giant explosive toppy apples thrown off. Anyway, so there were two more things that the guys going into Tobruk had to worry about. Number one, there was no traffic at night, but they had that covered with their German typewriters back in their German staff office that the SIG had set up. They had written specific paperwork for themselves saying, we are allowed to travel at night, because of course in Tobruk, no night traffic at all. It was bombed routinely. Well, not routinely, it was a bombing target, a target that could be bombed. And so the Germans basically had blackout laws, which almost everywhere had at the time, everywhere in Europe at least. So yeah, no travelling at night. These guys had paperwork. That's one solved. Number two was, this is where officers are a lot like dads, aren't they? At least when it comes to this sort of stuff. Like, it just so happened that the officers found out they had too much rum and that they couldn't take it all into Tobruk, and so they would have to drink all the rum tonight. So everyone got completely sloshed the night before they were going to take part in a very critical operation. Heavy drinking is actually a pretty key part of the SOE doctrine. The guys who basically created the SOE were frequently working like 18-hour days, and then they would just drink all night, wake up, 18-hour days, party, drink, party, work, drink, party, and they managed to come up with some of the greatest military inventions of all time, like the what do they call it, the emasculator or something like that, which is basically a type of mine that would come up about 4 feet in the air with a big razor blade in the end of it and do exactly what you think it did. They were really cool. I should do a video on the SOE and just how crazy they were. But yeah, so they got all these guys incredibly drunk, and then went to bed. The SIG actually got to interact with the commandos for the first time ever, pretty much. They actually got to sit down and chat with them, and this was done to try and break the sort of stigma of the thing that had happened at the Bacha airfield raid previously, where we talked about in the last video, where Bruckner had betrayed the men he was with and got them all killed, so they're worried like, oh, one of you are going to do that. So that's where I'll leave the video. But, oh no, I'll do one more thing before I leave the video. A little cliffhanger, a bit of suspense. Ian Smith had come across a bunch of tracks. Outside of Bacha, he had seen a lot of tracks. He estimated 30 tanks, plus motor transport vehicles, so sort of trucks and half-tracks. He was, okay, this is not supposed to be here. Nothing is supposed to be in this area. And he radios this back. And he radios back to his bosses. And they say, oh, we forgot to tell you, 5,000 Italians are now between you and Bacha airfield. They've set up a camp. We don't know why. They just did it like yesterday. There's an Italian camp between you and Bacha. And they did bring half division of tanks through that area. That's probably what you're seeing. Don't panic. They're Italians. We just forgot to tell you. And so Ian Smith is a bit like, sorry, you what? You didn't think I should know this, or you didn't have my number? What's going on here? He's quite pissed off and confused. As like, why wouldn't you just tell me this? Like, what's going on? Why are they here? Do we have any information whatsoever? And the guys back at HQ are just like, no, they're just Italians. It's cool. Oh, there's 18 more bombers in that airfield. More targets. And Ian Smith's like, no, not more targets. I mean, I get that you're a positive guy, like glass half full and all that, but 18 extra bombers is not more targets. That's a build-up. What are they doing with those 18 bombers? You don't just park them there for us to destroy. And the guys back at home are like, oh, it's cool. Just destroy them. Just don't give them a chance. You're going to go in like a day or two anyway. Sneak past the 5,000 Italians. Avoid the tanks that if you basically see, they'll just instantly kill you by looking at you. Blow up the bombers, along with the 20 other aircraft. Oh, and then half the force is going to attack a barracks somewhere else, not relevant to this, and then get out in one piece. Cool. So that's going to be the next episode. The next episode is going to be the infiltration of Tobruk. Probably just the infiltration of Tobruk, because there is a lot to talk about there. I believe at one point an Allied soldier starts pissing out the side of a truck. Tobruk's going to be a lot of fun. The infiltration of Tobruk's going to be a lot of fun. And there is twists to this story. Oh, there are some twists coming up. So stay tuned for this next episode. I believe this is going out on Monday, which may be Sunday afternoon for you in the US. So check back on Thursday night or Friday morning to see the next installment of, I think the series is going to be called the SIG or something like that. So yeah, come back next time, and let's continue the journey of the SIG in the Second World War.